It all started on a bright Saturday afternoon when I noticed a convoy of unfamiliar cars pulling into our gated community. Our HOA had strict rules. Every guest had to be pre-registered, and security had to log them in. These cars, however, rolled in like they owned the place. From my window, I saw them park across multiple driveways, blocking mailboxes and even edging onto my lawn. That was strike one. Curious, I grabbed my phone and stepped outside. That's when I saw her. Karen. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of posture that screamed, "I run this place," even though she didn't. She was waving the guests toward her backyard, like she was hosting a celebrity gala. I approached her and asked, "Karen, did you get these guests approved with the HOA?" She didn't even look at me at first, just kept walking. Finally, she turned and gave me the patented Karen half smirk. "Oh, they're my friends. They don't need approval. This is a community. People should be allowed to visit without all this paperwork." I reminded her of the rules, which she knew perfectly well, and told her that if her guests weren't registered, they weren't allowed. She scoffed and muttered something about power-hungry neighbors. Minutes later, I was in my backyard, and I noticed two of her guests had wandered behind my fence, on my property. One of them was even taking selfies on my deck. That was strike two. I marched over and told them to leave immediately. Karen stormed over, furious. "You can't tell my guests where they can go." "They're just looking around." "That's called trespassing, Karen," I replied. She went quiet for a moment, her face tightening. Then she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the cops," she said with a triumphant tone, like she had just declared victory in a neighborhood war. Within 15 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up. The officers asked me about the situation, and I calmly explained that these people were not only unapproved visitors, but had entered my property without permission. The officer turned to Karen. "Ma'am, did you register your guests with the HOA?" Karen hesitated. "Well, no, but that's not the point." "Actually, ma'am, that is the point," the officer interrupted. She crossed her arms, visibly shaken. The party was already starting to fizzle out. What Karen didn't know yet was that her little stunt was about to cost her a lot more than just a ruined afternoon. The cops didn't arrest anyone that day, but they did escort the trespassers out and give Karen a polite but firm warning. I thought that would be the end of it. Oh, how wrong I was. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a loud thunk against my front door. I opened it to find a folded letter shoved into the crack. No envelope, just messy handwriting in bold capital letters. "Your behavior yesterday was unacceptable. You embarrassed me in front of my friends. This community is about neighborhood spirit, not rules. You've made an enemy." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a detective to figure out who wrote it. Later that day, I heard the sound of Karen's voice drifting over the fence. She was in full rant mode with another neighbor, telling a twisted version of events, how I supposedly attacked her guests, screamed at them, and threatened to call the cops, conveniently leaving out the part where she actually called them first. By Monday evening, I noticed the HOA board email list had exploded with complaints. Most were from people I didn't even know, accusing me of being unwelcoming and power-hungry. Some emails even suggested my property be reviewed for compliance issues. It was clear Karen was rallying an army. That night, while I was bringing in my trash bins, I saw 2 men I didn't recognize walking slowly past my driveway, pointing at my security cameras. I knew they were connected to Karen somehow. She had been grumbling for weeks about how intrusive cameras were in our neighborhood. That was strike 3. I decided it was time to go on the offensive, but legally. The next morning, I compiled the security footage from the party day. The guests parking illegally, them walking onto my deck, Karen's face when the cops confronted her. I sent the video to the HOA board with a very polite note. For the sake of accuracy, here's the full incident in question. I trust this will clear up any confusion caused by misinformation. Within hours, the replies shifted. Some board members apologized for jumping to conclusions. Others were suspiciously silent. Karen, however, didn't stay quiet. That same evening, she marched up to my front porch and started yelling about defamation and privacy violations. I calmly reminded her that security footage on my property was legal and that her guests had been breaking the law. Her voice rose to a shriek. "You think you can make a fool out of me?" I didn't answer. I just closed the door. Little did I know Karen wasn't done escalating. She was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. 2 days later, I noticed something odd. My mailbox flag was up even though I hadn't put any outgoing mail inside. When I opened it, I found a crumpled flyer advertising a community meeting in Karen's backyard, scheduled for that evening. The flyer wasn't just an invite, it was a hit piece. In big bold letters, it read, "Stop HOA tyranny! Meet to discuss removal of certain board-approved members who think they run the neighborhood." My address was listed underneath. I wasn't on the HOA board, but I guess in Karen's mind that didn't matter. She was rallying people to publicly shame me. That night, I stayed home with my security cameras rolling. Sure enough, a crowd gathered at Karen's house. I could hear her voice through my open window, loud and theatrical. "She's the reason this neighborhood feels like a prison. She spies on us, bans our guests, and calls the cops on decent people. Is that the kind of community you want to live in?" The small group clapped. Some laughed. Then, to my disgust, they began chanting my name, followed by, "Move out!" I stayed calm. Let them talk. I knew something they didn't. Trespassing wasn't the only rule Karen had broken that day at the party. A week earlier, the HOA had sent a memo reminding residents that all outdoor gatherings with more than 15 people required prior approval and noise permits. Karen had not only ignored that rule, she had violated the city's noise ordinance by blasting music past midnight. I printed out the HOA rules, attached the video evidence of her party, and sent a copy to the HOA board and the city code enforcement office. It didn't take long for things to turn. The very next morning, an official-looking SUV pulled up to Karen's driveway. 2 city officers walked up and knocked on her door. From my kitchen window, I saw her forced smile as she tried to talk her way out of it. 10 minutes later, she was handed a paper, likely a citation. The meeting that night in her backyard? Canceled. The signs she'd been hanging around the neighborhood? Gone by morning. But Karen wasn't defeated. Oh no. The following day, she doubled down with a stunt so outrageous, I almost laughed until I realized how dangerous it could have been. It was Friday afternoon when I noticed a police cruiser slowly rolling down our street. I thought nothing of it until it stopped in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out and approached my door. One of them asked, "Ma'am, did you call 911 earlier about a domestic disturbance here?" My jaw dropped. Absolutely not. They explained that a 911 call had been made from my number, reporting screaming, loud banging, and possible violence. The call was anonymous, but somehow routed with my address attached. That's when it clicked. Karen. She'd staged a false report to get me in trouble. I invited the officers inside to look around. My home was peaceful, my TV was off, and I was in the middle of watering my plants. The officers apologized for the misunderstanding, but they took the situation seriously. "If someone is making false emergency calls, that's a criminal offense," one of them said. After they left, I reviewed my security camera footage. Sure enough, about 15 minutes before the cruiser arrived, I caught Karen pacing on the sidewalk near my driveway, speaking into her phone. I didn't hesitate. I sent the footage to the police department, attaching a written statement detailing the harassment over the past few weeks, from the trespassing guests to the public shaming and now the false emergency call. 3 days later, a detective called me. He said they had enough evidence to confront Karen and warned her that if another false report came in, she'd face criminal charges. Word must have spread quickly because Karen avoided me completely after that. No more flyers, no more surprise meetings, no more yelling over the fence. She even started parking her car as far from my property as possible, as if proximity alone could get her in trouble. A month later, the HOA held its quarterly meeting. I attended, and to my surprise, Karen was not there. Apparently, she had quietly listed her house for sale. Whether it was embarrassment, fear of legal trouble, or both, she was gone within 2 months. The neighborhood felt lighter. People actually smiled at me again, and more than a few quietly admitted they had been pressured into siding with Karen before realizing how manipulative she was. I never set out to make an enemy, but sometimes, when someone pushes you far enough, the only option left is to push back harder. Karen thought she could control the narrative, but in the end, the truth and a few well-placed security cameras did all the talking. And as for her infamous guests, they never showed their faces here again.